Did you know that adoptees are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than non-adoptees? I'm Christina, and I'm a Korean adoptee myself, and on this channel, one of the things that I'm passionate about is having uncomfortable conversations about hard things, and that often includes takeaways from my own lived experience being a transracial adoptee in the United States. The stat that I mentioned at the beginning may seem unbelievable, but I absolutely believe and have seen firsthand how this can be true. I myself have not been in a deep depressive state, but I know many adoptees who go and have gone through very dark times, including a close family member of mine who was at one point admitted into a psychiatric ward for suicidal ideation. In this video, I want to share a few things that would have helped me as a young adoptee trying to navigate not only adolescence, but the added layer of adoption and being an adoptee and how that plays a role in my story. So if you're a young adoptee, then maybe you can learn from my past mistakes. Hindsight's always 20/20. Here are my tips that I would have told my younger self. Acknowledge the impact that being an adoptee has on your life. I wish there had been more acknowledgement about what it means to be adopted and my life before adoption. I mean, I don't believe my parents were avoiding it or dismissive of my pre-adopted life, but I think that it just didn't really cross their minds to talk about it. And honestly, I don't even know what I would have wanted them to say or what I would have wanted to hear, but I guess just being adopted is a different and unique situation from my peers, from my classmates, from my friends, and it changes a whole lot more than non-adoptees, including and maybe even especially adoptive parents. And I think my own parents fit into that category for sure. In my parents' case, they've even said as much. They truly just didn't see us as any different. Therefore, they believed that the world wouldn't see us as any different. And it seems so naive and it seems so like how could you possibly think that? But I kind of get it. I don't know, I just feel like racial awareness, and especially for people who are unaffected by racial elements, I just think it just doesn't really cross their mind. I think my views on so many things, both mentally and psychologically, have been shaped by this part of my story, from being an adoptee, from being specifically a transracial adoptee. So allowing myself to acknowledge that earlier on, like as a young person, I think would have been immensely helpful, understanding why I am the way I am in a lot of ways. So another thing that would have helped me is if I was able to talk to adoptees who had come before me. So older adoptees who had already lived through the experience. Now with the internet and social media, it's so easy to connect with other adoptees of all ages. I mean, I grew up surrounded by adopted people. I have 3 siblings in exactly the same boat as me. They're all Korean adoptees. And in addition to that, my neighbor and his sister were also adopted. Several girls I figure skated with. And even with all of this access to fellow adoptees, it was not really that helpful. It was helpful, but it wasn't. So I think I've mentioned in past videos that we all have very different views on adoption and topics related to adoption and being Korean. But in addition to that, I'm realizing we were all just kids, going through our own kid stuff, and it's so much harder to see the big picture as a child or as a young person. And talking with an older adoptee who had lived through it already, I think would have been really helpful, much more insightful than trying to speculate with other adoptees in your same stage of life. So another thing, I guess number 3, owning my differences. I don't know how to phrase that. I wish I would have owned my Asianness much earlier on, instead of trying to hide from it, instead of trying to just avoid the whole topic. I don't know, even though I don't look like society's ideal standard of beauty, in my community in my school, certainly I wish I would have had blonde hair and blue eyes, and that was definitely the standard of beauty that was kind of idolized, I guess, in my kind of environment. Decades later, I'm realizing, being Asian has definitely its own beauty to it. Just now in my 30s, am I able to appreciate my Asian look and my Asian background. So if I could tell my adolescent and teenage self something, it would be to just own it. Don't let anyone try to make you feel inferior because of it. I mean, they really can't make you feel anything. People will always try to get you down. That's just the world we live in. There's always going to be negative Nellies out there. There's always going to be other people who need to put others down in order to make themselves to lift themselves up or to make themselves feel bigger. And I think that I was so just afraid of drawing attention to myself. I just like did not want to, I don't know, like I was just shy, but it was more than shy. It was really just like being afraid of bullying, like being afraid of like giving people something to extra ammunition. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like, yeah, just owning it. I mean, you're born what you are, you might as well embrace it in a sense. I don't know. So if you're an adoptive parent, here are a few things that you could do for your young adoptees. Or let's just make up this term. Maybe it's already a term. Adoptee mirrors. So I've more recently heard the term racial mirrors kind of thrown around, which I think is awesome. And I think that's definitely important. But an adoptee mirror, where, like I said kind of before, where somebody who has lived it, somebody who's like ahead of you, like not the same age as you, I think would be like really helpful for young adoptees who maybe have questions or they just want to be heard by somebody who might have some insight into what they might be experiencing. I think that would be really helpful if you can provide that. So like there are questions I had growing up that I really couldn't talk to anyone about, like even fellow adoptees, including my own siblings who are also adopted and friends who are adopted, couldn't really help or reflect because they had different views on it, or they were not in the same headspace as me at that time. And two, a therapist. So I think there's a lot of value to be found in therapy. However, I think that a therapist who specializes in adoptee trauma and topics is ideal. I don't think just any random therapist, depending on what your child is seeking, what your child is struggling with, it may not be as helpful as you might think. Like, I think it's not up to the adoptee to educate the therapist on like the deep-seated issues that adoptees face. So I think they need to have already a foundational knowledge of adoptee topics and the recurring issues that come up. So a therapist, but the right one. Another thing, so if you're an adoptive parent, just listen, like create an environment and opportunities for your adoptee to just talk and for you to just listen. I feel like when I tried to describe my frustrations and discomforts I had faced in school or otherwise, like being like a young person related to being and looking different, it was often kind of, I don't know, it was maybe met with a little bit of disbelief, or like if I was sharing like a situation where I felt treated differently than it was in my head, or people don't see me as any different. It was just kind of like, I don't know. So it's like the term like gaslighting really comes to mind now, looking back on instances where I was as young as like 6 or 7 years old and something would happen at school, or, I'd tell my parents about it and it would kind of be brushed off. Oh, like they must have not meant it in that way, or that probably happens to everyone. And I think this comes back to the fact that my parents truly felt they didn't see us as any different, and therefore the world wouldn't see us as any different. And I mean, I think gaslighting is that's a very heavy term for this. Like I'm not trying to put down my parents at all. Like as I've said so many times, I do believe parents do the best they can with the resources they have in that time. And I think this is true here too. Like I don't think that it was meant to be dismissive in a negative way. I don't know. I don't think that they really realized the impact. So, just listen and believe that whatever they're feeling, like they're feeling that for whatever reason. So, all right, number 4, if you're an adoptive parent, there are things that you're just not going to be able to fix. So don't try to fix everything. I think there's a roller coaster of emotions and phases that will occur, and that have occurred in my own and like adoptee life. And it's just beyond anyone's control. Like there's not really much anybody can say or do during these times where like these moments of like realization and these moments of kind of revelation like have come at different points in my life. And part of it's like me letting go and acknowledging that this is probably unresolved stuff from very early on that I've just kind of brushed aside for so long. And then as I've matured, and certainly becoming a parent definitely made me really face things that I didn't want to face for a long time. Just recognizing that this is going to be a lifelong process. So if you're an adoptive family of any configuration, this is part of it. And you just have to recognize this and like be there and continue to show up like for support, even if your child declines it or doesn't seem like they want or need anything from you. It's just going to be the fact that you showed up and just reassured them that you're there. I think that's going to make a big difference. And my last tip for adoptive parents: so seek out positive role models who are from the country and culture of origin for your adoptee. So I can't say for sure if my adolescent self would have been as open to this as my present day self, but now, like, for example, if I see like Korean influencers or Korean cooking channels or blogs, then I like actually get excited. I have something in common with these people, and they are celebrating this part of themselves, like the culture, the cuisine, or whatever. I think like it's different than, you know, if my parents had just like, I think, tried to make Korean cuisine at home. Yeah, that's effort, and that's definitely something. But I think that's also from an outsider perspective. Like I think if somebody, like an actual Korean person who's culturally Korean, made Korean cuisine and was, you know, obviously passionate about it, and obviously like that was a part of them, I think that brings forth a whole different level of pride, and you know that they're sharing that part of themselves. I think that's probably how it would have gotten through to me, is to see people who look like me being proud of looking like me, like looking Korean and being culturally Asian. And I really just didn't have that. And hopefully that's changing now. You know, I think that places are becoming more diverse, especially in the States. You know, having come back to my home state, I will say it's still pretty non-diverse. So you really have to seek out that type of cultural involvement if you want that to be a part of your child's life. So I hope some of you found this video helpful. Whether you're an adoptee yourself or know someone who is, you know, I think that there's a lot to unpack there. It's a lot that I never would have admitted earlier than this. Like, as a young person, I just know, you know, nobody wants to be different from their peers. And I think that really made me kind of squash like this part of me. Like I really just didn't talk about it, didn't acknowledge it. Like, you know, if you just don't pay it any attention, it's like it's not there. But it was always there, you know, so avoiding it definitely didn't help me in any ways. It just delayed this process of really understanding myself till much, much later. My goal here is to hopefully help in some way the next generation of adoptees and adoptive families in any way that I can. And the best way I know how is to share insight from my own lived experience. Is this everyone's experience who's a Korean adoptee? No. So I don't ever claim that to be true. Anyway, remember to subscribe for more videos like this one, and thanks for watching. Bye.